from me. I need you to stay right there. I'm coming right away, my dear.
The Tank Museum, Bovington, UK. The home of the tank. The home of Tankfest. And home to one of the finest collections of armour in the world. The Tank Museum tells the story of the tank and the people that served in them. There are 300 vehicles here, most of which are displayed inside the museum's large halls. In fascinating modern exhibitions, you'll come face to face with tanks that have seen action in every major conflict since the First World War. From the world's first tank to some of the latest, there is an extensive World War II collection and unique examples of the prototypes that didn't quite make the grade. With a workshop facility and an extensive archive and supporting collection, the Tank Museum is a centre of armoured excellence, sharing its passion with a global audience on its YouTube channel. Bovington is regarded as the home of the tank, because it was here that the Tank Corps, the world's first tank regiment, made its home in 1916. This remote rural location was ideal for training tank soldiers, with British, Commonwealth and US troops all passing through the gates of Bovington camp before heading to the front lines. Over a century later, it remains a major training centre for British soldiers learning to fight in tanks. The Tank Museum was formed in 1923 as a military teaching collection. When the First World War ended in 1918, hundreds of tanks began accumulating in the fields around Bovington, waiting to be cut up for scrap. But thanks to an important intervention, rumours suggest it was Jungle Book author Rudyard Kipling, one of each type was fenced off and saved. During the interwar years, the collection continued to grow. But at the outbreak of the Second World War, some of the collection was sacrificed in the drive for scrap metal. Others were only saved because they were employed as anti-invasion defences at road junctions around the garrison. At the end of the war, the Tank Museum accepted a significant number of new donations from the army. These included many examples of Allied vehicles, and a significant number of captured Axis tanks. When the Tank Museum opened to the public in the 1950s, admission was free, and visitors could climb on and inside the vehicles to their heart's content. A new era began at the Tank Museum in 2009, with the completion of a multi-million-pound redevelopment project and the opening of the flagship Tank Story exhibition. Since then, visitor numbers have continued to grow, allowing the Tank Museum to continue to develop its exhibitions and enthuse a new generation in the story of armoured warfare. And there is much more to look forward to from Bovington. But if there's one event in the museum's calendar which highlights the growing enthusiasm for our subject, then Tankfest would be it. The first ever Tankfest took place in 2000. With fewer than 1,000 visitors on a single afternoon, it was a small affair by modern standards and run entirely by volunteers. But the objective of the event remains the same today: to operate a range of historic armour that simply cannot be seen anywhere else. The third Tankfest in 2004 attracted 6,000 visitors, who turned out to see Tiger 131 run in public for the first time since its capture in 1943. The event went annual in 2008 and also became a two-day show. By 2010, attendances had crossed the 10,000 mark, and in 2014, World of Tanks became the event's main sponsor. It's a partnership that has endured and seen attendances continue to grow, making Tankfest a sellout every year. And as a result, it's the most important fundraising event in the Tank Museum calendar. The last event in 2019 welcomed 25,000 visitors across 3 action-packed days. Over the years, we've displayed some of the finest running armour in existence. From our own collection, from the military, from private collections, and from other military museums. Find out more at tankfest.org. Now sit back and enjoy Tankfest Online, the world's finest collection of tanks in action for free.
So we're just having a drive around, and in the end the nature of reconnaissance is that you push forward until you meet resistance, gather as much information as you can, and move back. Now the thing about the German tactics in Blitzkrieg was that they were in full contact with rear echelon at all times, so they could call in support in a way that the Allied armies couldn't. And this is one of the lessons that was learnt in the Battle of France and through the early years of the war, that the Germans had a much more cohesive way of operating in the field. And that was a thing that had to be learnt before the battles in Normandy and before the later part of the war, when the Allies gained the upper hand. So we've still got a Kubel in the front, so they're obviously feeling brave. Oh, and now we have a little Stuart tank. So here come the Allies. And they've obviously got wind that the Germans are in the area. They're moving slowly. And a half-track with a Maxton gun on the top. So that's 4 50 caliber machine guns. That's quite a lot of firepower. You wouldn't want to be on the wrong end of it. But the little Stuart is quite lightly armoured, called by the British a Honey because they had Cadillac engines in the back and they drove very much like a motor car, unlike a tank with a radial engine, which can be quite a handful because they have a flat torque curve. The little Stuart drove very much like a motor car with an automotive torque curve. So very much a waiting game at the moment. Not sure if the Americans actually know that the Germans are there. I did know there's a half-track coming in with an anti-tank gun. So they've obviously got a plan for that and the Stuart. And the German crew unhitching their anti-tank gun, getting ready to manhandle it into position, round the outside of the Germans, see if they can outflank them. And we've got a Dingo armoured car coming into the arena with some more American infantry, so they've called in support.
So about the same time as the Valentine's in service, there's our Panzer III. This is a lovely warhorse tank. I mean, it's been around the places, it runs all the time, very reliable from our point of view. Is that the kiss of death? Is it about to break down? Captured out in North Africa, Panzer L. So again, when you look at all of these books, Austrian, Model A, Model B, Model C, normally an improvement or additions. This has gone down to the Model L. It's got extra armour bolted on the front. It was going to have another bit of extra armour on the front mat clip.
Oh, they've hit the Stuart already. Self-propelled anti-tank gun, that's coming into the arena now. That would be more than a match for a Sherman. But there's only one of them, and there's more than one Sherman. Okay, so the Americans have lost the first Sherman to the Stug.
And we're now in the Tank Story Hall with a very special and quite unique Panther. Why is that then, Richard?
Well, this Panther, it's the Tank Museum's Panther, so of course it's a special Panther. But this Panther is quite an unusual one. This one is British made. It's one of a batch of Panthers made right back into the Second World War, after effectively the British captured the German production line. So we kind of turn the handle a few times to see what comes off. So there's a plate on the front of this one that says it was made by the Remy, or under the supervision of the Remy. And because of that, it's got a number of really quite interesting features which aren't very typical. It's got a couple of British features on there. But it's your archetypal kind of big, complicated, beautiful and expensive German tank that it looks stunning, they're lovely things, but it's a war-losing tank, like all the other German tanks.
Second World War vehicles. We're a bit used to seeing tanks. Some of you down here perhaps for the first time. Some of you, if you've seen some of these tanks running around before, you know we've got some amazing things that run. But where else in the world are you going to see a running Hargo? You're not. So this one here coming on, this is a Japanese tank designed in the early 1930s, often compared to the Stuart tank, the Americans. Actually, it's almost a decade ahead of the Stuart. What's a DD? If you're looking at the rear of the tank, duplex drive, it can drive by its tracks or it can drive by using the propeller on the rear. They're trying to float that tank on a lake outside London. Same lake in 1940, they start experiments with Nicholas Strausler. How are we going to float a tank? How does it get across rivers? And there it is running with another absolute classic British infantry tank. This is the Mark II infantry tank, the Matilda. Now the Matilda II, designed just before World War II, gets there just in time, the first of being issued to the troops in '39, and this was a tank that beat the Italians in O'Connor's campaign in the Western Desert, frightened the life out of the Germans in France in 1940, and went on to serve in the Far East right to the end of the war. Now, there is a little bit of a tendency to always go ooh about the German vehicles and perhaps not really look at some of the British successes. And the vehicle going around now, again, just before the war, competition, we want a small scout car, that becomes the Daimler Dingo. Now this one's something called the M16 half-track, followed by the SDKF-Z7 half-track. Germany and America really went to town on half-tracks in the 30s. They like the experimental. Let's try and make vehicles. Congress used to work at one point for the Tsar. He was looking at putting track vehicles together. Lots of countries like the idea of them for their off-road mobility. And we're very lucky today. We've got 3 different types of Sherman will be coming on. The first one coming on is one of the early model M4A1. Look them in the eye and say, look, that is a tank that pretty much saved the West. It is a brilliantly simple design, met for a specification, 30 tons. They're going to have to send it around. When they first go into action, the Sherman, like the M4A1, those Shermans were used by British forces at the Battle of Alamein in October of '42, and we loved them. They were reliable. Longer body when you goes round. If you want to be a real spotter, look at the wheels. They're slightly further apart because they had to make this longer to fit yet another type of engine in. And this is the Chrysler multi-bank engine where they get a whole load of car engines. So with the T-34-85 there in the arena moving at the same time, you've got the 2 tanks that probably won the war for the Allied forces, one in the east and one in the west. And it was to meet a requirement for a long-range reconnaissance vehicle that was going to be used out in Afghanistan.
Originally, it was designed by Supercat to fire from this position, so it gives it a more stable platform. In the end, it didn't really work that way, so we normally fire it from the intermediate position, as you've seen now.
Now, we're going back in time, it seems now, but to a vehicle still in service with the British Army. This is called the Scimitar. And again, this is a vehicle now going to go out of service. It'll be going out of service in a couple of years' time. You may have been following, there was a Warrior replacement program, new turret steel, or nowadays reactive or laminate armors as well. That's one of the other things that you always have to think about. The bigger the weight on that vehicle, the slower it's going to get.
So coming in now, we have a Foxhound and a Mastiff. Mastiff being active protection systems. We've seen this. I'm going to be quiet now because you'll be hearing me anyway. I stepped out of the way because I know who's driving that. I was mentioning the pushing the pendulum, we call it. There's always an action and a counter-action. Look at this thing, it's very frightening. If your tank breaks down, this is a Challenger
armoured repair and recovery vehicle. General purpose machine gun in the top there. Early days it had a .30 Browning machine gun. The best weapon on this vehicle was not that machine gun, it's a radio. Your role in this vehicle was going out, reporting back what you were seeing door so that the weapons teams can enter. Now at the same time as you doing secretive type of reconnaissance, you can do it another way, and you might want in other countries. This underneath all this vehicle, this particular one's called a Cougar, but underneath it is actually a vehicle that was designed originally in Switzerland. Now they start making the 432 in 1962, and they're actually, some of them are still in service today. So if you work that one out, we're looking at a vehicle there that's about 60 years. Now this is another guest vehicle. You may have seen it earlier on. This is the AMX-13, a French vehicle built just after the Second World War. So the French military have to re-establish their arms industry. They've been doing some secret work. Now, many countries that bought or used the Centurion, when the time came to replace the Centurion, like this one is a Canadian Leopard here driving around. The Canadians had Centurions. When time came to replace them, they went for this tank, the Leopard 1. The German militaries reformed in 1955. America supplies tanks, they buy vehicles. One built, the M60, and as you look at it driving around, whopping great cast hull, cast turret, that yet again that British L7 105mm gun. And the high-ab crane on the back, and that odd-looking structure on the rear is to mount an engine on, so they can lift that spare pack off the back of the vehicle. And in this case, they actually put a 90mm low-pressure gun on it that can fire one of these rounds, hollow charge or squash heads, that can penetrate armour, not... Now, the IKV-91 was in service only in Sweden. It wasn't sold anywhere else, but again you can see that very distinctive Swedish camouflage pattern on it as well. Again, used specifically for those northern climates and the type of landscape Sweden was going to have to fight in. So I mentioned that the Soviets tend to build tanks evolutionary. T-54, T-55, then the T-62. Bit of a revolutionary tank was the T-64. Now we haven't got one here at Bovington. We're trying to get this one. Was captured in the Middle East, and you can see still very impressive looking bit of kit. Now our Challenger 1, it's got its gun reversed. In the Cold War, you didn't put your gun forward unless you knew that meant the enemy knew you meant business. So when they leave most of the training bases, gun over the rear engine decks unless you're being threatening.
So we're now in the Tank Story exhibition hall with Richard. I would have to say it's got to be your most famous vehicle down here.
Yeah, and I'd say not merely the most famous tank in the Tank Museum's collection, but you could argue quite coherently this is the most single famous tank in the world. And it's a quite interesting story really in some ways about how it became famous rather than just being another tank. And the absolute key to it was that in 2004 we worked with Abro, who became the Army Tank Maintenance Organisation at the time, and we took it from a set of original pieces to being a running vehicle. And there's something special about stuff that runs and works when you're looking at a machine. You know, this isn't a statue, this isn't a stuffed animal in a natural history museum. This is a machine. It's designed to do stuff, and it's by having it running that became attractive to see it on YouTube. That's the reason that David Ayer wanted it for the Fury movie, and it's what made it famous.
As you can see, both of our vehicles from exactly the same range have hit accurately with all their rounds. I think it's safe to say that the frontal armour has been penetrated and our Tiger has been completely destroyed.
Welcome to the French Tank Museum. We are based in Saumur. Our friends asked us a top 5 tanks, but with 200 vehicles in exhibition, it is quite hard to choose. So we will present you only French vehicles in chronological order. The Saint-Chamond is one of the oldest vehicles in our collection, and was one of the earliest French tanks. It was first used in 1917 during the First World War. This tank, which was named Fleur d'Amour, or Love Flower, is the last surviving Saint-Chamond of the 400 that were built. She was recently restored to be drivable for the First World War centenary commemorations. The Saumur S-35 was one of the best French tanks in 1940 when the Third Reich attacked France. Her gun and armor were superior to the German panzers, but her single-person turret prevented the tank from being as effective. This Saumur is the last fully working example in the world. She was delivered to the 2nd Regiment of Cuirassiers. She is painted with the insignia of her regiment, the sun. This Panther was a trophy of war. It was captured in 1944 in the east of France by the French 2nd Armored Division after the Battle of Dompierre. This is why there is a huge badge of the division painted on the tank, to avoid friendly fire. After the war, this Panther spent 30 years in Paris to commemorate the victory, before joining our collection. The AMX-50 is the biggest French tank at the Musée des Blindés. This prototype was conceived to overcome Soviet tanks at the start of the Cold War. Its autoloader allowed it to fire more quickly than all other tanks. However, due to a lack of resources and, above all, the rapid evolution of projectile technology, the program was abandoned. This is the last surviving AMX-50. The final tank is the AMX-30B2, because this year we have been commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Gulf War, in which the AMX-30 participated. This tank has been repainted in the colors of the Daggett Division, which was deployed to the Gulf. The AMX-30 remained highly effective throughout its service, thanks to several upgrades, until it was replaced by the Leclerc tank. We would love to welcome you to the Summer Tank Museum. Please visit our website, Instagram, and Facebook. Our museum is open all year. We hope to see you soon. Many thanks to the Bovington Tank Museum, and bon Tankfest à tous.
Welcome to Arsenalen in Sweden. In this collection we have a few vehicles, quite a lot, that you will not find anywhere else in the world. And during this presentation I will take you through a few of these. And the first one is the oldest German-produced running tank in the world. The German-produced LK2 that we used in Sweden from 1921 and a few years later on as a test vehicle. This vehicle is one of 4 existing tanks of this type in the world. And the restoration took 5 years and it was finished and running again in 2018. Our next choice is this world-unique Renault NC27, the only existing tank in the world of this type, used in Sweden during the late 1920s for trials, and it was also exported to Japan, who used it in Manchuria during the 1930s. From one world-unique vehicle to another, this wheel-cum track vehicle that was developed in Sweden by Landsverk during the 1920s in order to combine 2 situations, but it was a dead end, no success, so this is the only vehicle that was built. It was a cooperation between Sweden and Germany. In our storage we have some very interesting vehicles that are waiting for place in the museum one day, like this articulated tank, the XX20. It was developed during the late 1970s. A lot of tests were made using this platform. A lot of experience came out of it, but never went into production. But one day we hope that we will put this and some other interesting vehicles on display in the museum. And of course, the most famous Swedish tank ever, the S-tank. In my opinion, the most fascinating tank ever built. So much effort put into this project to make the perfect tank. A vehicle that can be fully operated by just 1 crew member. I just love this tank. So that was a few examples from us and our collection. Check out our social media, and on YouTube we have a few very interesting films that are a bit special, so see you there.
Welcome from the Austrian Military Museum in Vienna. We are one of the oldest military museums in the world. Our collection goes back to the 1600s. My name is Franz Brödel, and these are the top 5 tanks from Vienna. Our number 5 tank is the prototype of the Austrian APC. It was the first tracked armored vehicle built in Austria after World War II. The development work started in 1952 when the Allies were still occupying Austria until 1955. Only this prototype vehicle was built and trialed by the new Austrian army in 1956. The trials went not so good, but It led the way to a new design, and in 1960, the serial production of the Austrian APC fleet started. Our number 4 tank is the Austrian light tank SK-105, also known as the Kürassier. The Kürassiers were produced in Austria during the 1970s, and they served in the Austrian army until 2006. This vehicle saw active service in 1991 during the border protection in southern Austria when Yugoslavia collapsed. The number 3 tank is the M4 Sherman, most loved by our visitors. The M4 Sherman series is not only a military but also an industrial icon that liberated Europe in World War II. This tank is on loan from the Tank Museum in Bovington, so thank you, Bovington. Our number 2 tank in the collection is my personal favorite, the M60A3. This American beauty was the tank that I was trained on as a young officer, and I spent many hours as tank and platoon commander on it. In fact, the M60 was the first great love in my life. Our number 1 in the collection is not a real tank. It's the Burstin tank. It's a model of the first tracked armored vehicle designed by Lieutenant Gunther Burstin in 1912 in Austria. The idea was ahead of its time. It has all the features of a modern tank, like the rotating turret, tracked chassis, and it has a special trench crossing device on the front and the back. It was never built because the Austrian army did not accept it. If you want to know more about Burstin's tank or the Austrian Military Museum, come to Vienna.
Welcome to the Museum of Armor Equipment, MUMA, located since its creation in 1996 in El Goloso Base, headquarters of the Infantry Brigade Guadarrama 12th, Madrid, Spain. French patented tank, it served in the Spanish armored units from 1970 to mid-90s. Due to problems in its gearbox and after several transformations, as a result of internal studies at the Infantry Academy in Toledo, the barge was lengthened by 30 centimeters to fit the American origin engine transmission group, resulting in this prototype called El Niño. German origin, year 1938, it was manufactured during Second World War. Spain acquired 20 units, 10 of which were assigned to Alcázar de Toledo Regiment number 61, belonging to Guadarrama 12th Brigade. After the material reorganization in 1950, the Cavalry Division received a Panzer IV mechanized platoon. Currently, the Spanish Army preserves 3 units. Originally from the former Soviet Union, 1931, a total of 281 T-26 tanks arrived in Spain in October 1936 at the port of Cartagena in order to join the Republican Army during the Spanish Civil War. Subsequently, a total of 139 tanks joined the National Army after the end of the war. German origin, 1935, also known as Maybach, Mercedes, a total of 21 units, 4 of them of command tanks, arrived in Spain at the port of Seville on November 25, 1936. At the end of the Spanish Civil War, they had participated in memorable battles such as Teruel and Belchite. These tanks were intimately linked to the Spanish Legion units. French origin, 1917, and being the first rotating tower tank, Spain acquired 17 units between 1921 and 1925, serving in the African campaigns such as the landing of Alhucemas. Subsequently, and during the Spanish Civil War, another 38 units were acquired. The Spanish Army preserves 4 units. The one located in Muma is totally restored and in perfect state of conservation, being this one the emblem of Brigade Guadarrama 12. The 100th anniversary of the Spanish Army armored units will be commemorated on March 9th 2022. The Museum of Armored Units, MUMA, can be found in its web page.
And welcome to the Royal Tank Museum, the home of military heritage. With 140 tanks and armored vehicles displayed in 15 galleries, the Royal Tank Museum is considered the biggest in the region. My name is Tammam, and today I'm gonna take you on a journey in and out the museum to see 5 of our best tanks. So stay tuned and welcome again to the museum. The T-34 medium tank. It is a strong beast. 80,000 of different variants were produced during and after World War II. And don't forget that using the slope armor on this tank was a genius idea and gave it strong advantage against the German tanks during World War II. Let's go see another tank. As a response to the T-34, the Germans decided to build this beast, the Panther, and they've used it against the T-34 and Soviets in Kursk battle. Today, it is standing in front of the Soviet T-34-85 at the World War II gallery in the Royal Tank Museum. The M4 Sherman. After World War II, the Sherman served in different armies around the world, including the Jordanian Armed Forces. It entered the service in our army in 1957 and stayed until 1961, where it was replaced by the Patton M47. It never fought in a battle in Jordan, but Khalid tank, or shall I say chieftain, is very unique for us Jordanian, as His Majesty King Abdullah II served on this tank during his service as the commander of the 2nd Battalion in the 40th Brigade. The icon of the Royal Tank Museum, the Patton M48. We consider it iconic because it defended our country in the Battle of Karama in March 1968. This is the Patton. So we hope you enjoyed our short journey today, and maybe we'll get the chance to have you here at the Royal Tank Museum. Also, don't forget to visit our social media platforms shown on the screen. Thank you so much, and goodbye.